Black Car of Skye. A haunting from a tragedy that was yet to come. Picture this. You're driving along a scenic country road when a black car comes into view speeding in your direction. With these narrow single-lane country roads, it's always a common courtesy to move your car out of the way to the nearest wide spot or passing place. So you do precisely that, only for the oncoming car to suddenly vanish, as if it had never been there in the first place. This has been the experience of hundreds of people on the Isle of Skye, just off the west coast of Scotland. Skye is a scenic and misty island, well known for its volcanic mountain ranges, its rock formations that look like castles grown out of the landscape, and its waterfalls and rivers that fill the rock pools of spring water known as fairy pools. There is no shortage of tales about strange encounters with the paranormal and the spirits of the departed. But the Isle's most puzzling and well-known haunting isn't by the spirit of a person, but by a vehicle. And this vehicle became known as the Wee Black Car of Skye. Since the 1930s, a whole cross-section of people have encountered the strange spectre, from locals to tourists and even police officers. All of them had witnessed the same car, black in colour, speeding along the road towards them before suddenly disappearing in front of them, as if it had never been there in the first place. Others reported seeing the lights of a car fast approaching, then suddenly the lights were gone. These sightings always occurred in the Kyle area of Skye, around the ferry port of Killegan. Some witnesses had even encountered the car more than once, and those who knew their vehicles described it as a black 1934 Austin. For 30 years, the strange apparition haunted the roads and lanes of Skye before it finally and suddenly stopped, as mysteriously as it had started. And the nature of the haunting would turn out to be even stranger than the haunting itself. Although locals had been talking about the mysterious car since the 30s, the first documented sighting was by a Dr. Alan MacDonald one night in 1941. He described how he saw a car driving with some urgency in his direction from a distance. As it approached, he moved aside to let it pass, but was astonished to see the vehicle was no longer there, and had seemingly vanished into thin air without a sound. There was no other traffic on the road, just his car and the dark and silent road in front of him, where the other car had just been seconds before. Up until that point, he hadn't noticed anything strange at all about the vehicle. It was just like any other car. The only thing of note was its urgency. Numerous other people have reported the exact same experience on the roads of the Isle. They would see the car approaching at speed, they would give way, and it would disappear just before reaching them. In all of these sightings, there was one account of the vehicle actually passing by instead of vanishing, but this account was no less disturbing. The witness described how he moved into the passing place, but was terrified to see that there was no one inside. There was no one physically driving the car as it passed by and raced on down the road. A local police constable by the name of Morrison reported pursuing a speeding car one night in the Killeakin area. Strangely, he reported that no matter how much he accelerated, the car in front of him remained at exactly the same distance ahead, and he was completely unable to close the distance between them. As the vehicle hurtled down the road toward the ferry harbour, Morrison took his foot off the pedal, reasoning that he could catch the driver there as there was no other route to escape to. It was essentially a dead end. But when the constable arrived at the harbour, there was nothing there. No car, no driver, nothing. Just the harbour and the waves beyond as the water lapped against the pier. One local man recalled encountering the mysterious vehicle 3 times. The first 2 times he was alone and pulled into the lay-by to let the car pass, only for it to disappear before reaching him. The 3rd time he encountered the vehicle, he decided not to give way. But this time he had passengers who shouted at him to give way or they were going to crash. But again, this time in front of the other witnesses, the car just vanished. We could assume that when the car was sighted, it seemed solid and normal, as none of the witnesses noticed anything strange until the moment it disappeared. The sightings continued for the next 30 years, always along the roads leading to the Skye ferry port, until they suddenly stopped around 1960. The most puzzling part about the haunting is that there didn't seem to be any record of an accident involving that type of car on the roads around Kyle. At least, not up to that point. Then one day, sometime around 1960, a car was speeding toward the Killeakin harbour to reach the ferry before it could depart on the short trip to the mainland. The driver, a local woman, was accompanied by 3 occupants, another local woman, a 2-year-old child, and a local church minister. Just as they reached the harbour ramp, they stopped and she asked the minister to take over as the ferry was a turntable craft and was a little tricky to board. He happily obliged and took the wheel, and they boarded the ferry just in time. But then something went wrong. The minister must have hit the accelerator in his haste instead of the brake. But whatever happened, the vehicle sped along the length of the ferry to the other side, smashing through the opposite ramp doors and plunging into the water below. One of the ferry workers immediately jumped into action and, mounting the roof of the car, tried to smash the windows with an axe, but the glass proved difficult to break. The water itself was not that deep, and in fact the roof was still above the surface, but unfortunately, those inside were still trapped under the waterline. He did manage to smash one of the front windows and the minister escaped, but unfortunately the others did not, and they drowned inside the vehicle before they could be helped to safety. The car they were driving was described as a 1934 Austin. A black 1934 Austin. Strangely, after this tragedy, the sightings of the strange black car stopped, and it was never seen again. This led many to believe that the apparition wasn't actually replaying a tragedy that had happened in the past, but in fact was foreshadowing a tragedy that had yet to come. Unfortunately, I couldn't come across an actual newspaper article or account of the accident itself, but I did come across a social media post claiming to have located the details of the incident. According to the poster, the tragedy happened on the 13th of April 1959 when a car went off a ferry called MV Broadford just off the Calecan Harbour and then plunged into 30 feet of water, killing all 4 occupants. As we can see, this differs a lot from the local accounts of the event. Unfortunately, the poster didn't include the source for its claim, and I wasn't able to find an article that pointed to these details. I also found that the ferry MV Broadford was not built until 1966, 7 years after the date of the above claim. Of course, it could be that the accident itself never even happened in the first place and was just part of local lore. But in a documentary made in 2009 about Skye's haunted heritage, a number of old residents who were interviewed remembered the accident well, and not only that, one of them even pointed out that Constable Morrison, who was mentioned earlier, had actually attended the scene of the tragedy, and that he had made an intriguing remark about the car. "Aye," he said, "that is the car that I saw." Although the interviewee didn't elaborate, we could safely surmise that Morrison was referring to the strange car that he had chased to the harbour that night before it vanished. If it is the case that the haunting was from the future, represented by sightings in the 30s, 40s and 50s, and fulfilled by a tragedy in the 1960s, it raises a whole range of intriguing questions, even questions about the nature of time. It's hard to know what the nature of the strange haunting of the Black Car of Skye was, but I'm sure there is an answer out there somewhere, just beyond our reach. Good night, wherever you are.